My platoon and I had been tasked to drive down and take over this compound on the edge of the green zone. And as we drive down into it, all hell just literally broke loose on us. RPG round bounced off the hood of the truck and blew up behind us. Turned two and started firing with the turret guns. People dismounted and started doing like bounds towards these enemy positions. The Marines just got out, dismounted the trucks and just started going at it with these guys. So then I go running across, and over the top of my head, my interpreter has his AK and is just firing bursts. Like, he's scared shitless, but he's like, I'm going to do something. It is chaos. And I run around the other side and I call my higher and say, hey, we're in a pretty sticky situation and we need to get out of here. He goes, yeah, you have my approval. And I was kind of like, I'm not asking you. This is what we are going to do.
Welcome to Combat Story. I'm AJ Pasciuti, a retired Marine, Force Recon, Scout Sniper, and Marine Gunner with 21 years of service, multiple combat tours, and a lifetime of lessons learned in the arena itself. On this show, I sit down with warriors from every front line to uncover what combat truly feels like and how it shapes the way we see life, each other, and ourselves. This is Combat Story. In today's Combat Story, we sit down with Lieutenant Colonel Ivan F. Ingraham, USMC, a 24-year Marine who spent most of his career in special operations as a Marine Raider with MARSOC. He's since turned those hard-won lessons into leadership coaching, writing, and speaking. Ivan is the author of a novel, Once We Pledged Forever, and a series of shorter works that examine leadership, moral injury, and the human cost of war, including The Patrol, a story of MARSOC at war, 22, A Journey to the Edge of Darkness, Athena, Bravery Knows No Gender, and Dream Job. His newsletter, The Logbook, explores life, leadership, and purpose within the same unflinching clarity. His voice will be familiar to readers of The War Horse and Task and Purpose, where he has written on service, family, and leading under pressure, with one recent essay reflecting on welcoming home his deployed daughter and the realities of returning from war. Ivan's also an in-demand speaker. His Eagle in the Mountains talk and leadership workshops bring battlefield-tested lessons to companies, teams, and communities that want to perform when it counts. Join us as we dive into Ivan's story, from Marine Raider to author and coach, to talk about courage, the weight of command, building trust when the stakes are high, and finding purpose on the far side of uniformed service. This is Ivan Ingraham. So I'm excited today to have Ivan Ingraham, our guest here. What I've understood is 24 years active duty in the Marines as an officer in both conventional and special operations. And so we're excited, also an author. So super excited to have a conversation with you today. I wanted to be able to talk about some combat stories, but my first question always revolves around the genesis. So like, what led you to your service? What was your family life like before you joined the military? Was there a large inclination that led you to this, to be able to make the decision to join the Marines specifically?
My father was retired. Well, he retired as an Army colonel. He was lifelong soldier, and I had spent time moving around the world with him in the wake of service during the Vietnam era. My father was not a Vietnam veteran as far as like serving in country in that war, but he joined the military in 1967 and certainly served all during that time. He was a military psychologist, so that has its own interesting things as far as growing up. So I grew up around the service. All my friends, for the most part, as I was moving around, were military or former or were associated with the military in some capacity. And I absolutely had an interest in military history. I enjoyed traveling around when we were living in Europe and going to battlefields. And I spent a lot of time reading about, tales of daring do in the post-Vietnam era growing up in the 1980s. Yeah. But oddly, it wasn't something that ever compelled me saying, okay, as soon as I get out of high school or college, this is exactly what I'm going to do. I wouldn't say that I absolutely eschewed it, but it wasn't anything that I really thought about doing. So my first inclination to really, after I got out of college, was to become a federal law enforcement agent. I thought that would be a pretty interesting thing. And I looked at various entities like the DEA, the FBI, the Marshals, diplomatic security. I kind of wanted this exciting lifestyle and in a sense of doing something that was service oriented. And this is in the middle 1990s. there's not a lot going on as far as conflict. Well, there's plenty of conflict going on in the world, but none of the big stuff that we would run into later or serving later. But at that point in time, I thought that would be a great way to sort of balance out being able to be doing something really interesting and also serve, in some capacity. And then I kept getting turned down during the interviews, whether it was by lack of educational background or just bad timing. But eventually I asked one of the interviewers, I said, what do I do? Because I really want to do this. And so they were just blunt. They were like, look, you're young. You quite frankly don't have a lot of experience. You're interviewing fine, but we only have room for 1,200 new agents, and we can be really picky. And honestly, if you really want to make yourself competitive, go become a local cop, detective. Go join the military. Get some experience, and you'll be more competitive. You'll still be plenty young enough to do this, but it's not something that people generally can come in and do. But the fact you made it this far is actually testament to your work ethic. It's certainly how you present yourself. But that's our recommendation.
And so you were like 22, sorry to cut in, but you were like 22, 23, 24-ish at this time frame?
Yeah, I was about 23 years old, 24 years old. I joined the Marine Corps when I was 25. I joined in 1997. And, at that point in time, it was just going to be a means to an end. I really didn't know that much about the military, despite growing up around it and in that environment. I didn't know much about how any of this stuff worked.
So was federal service always the goal? Like federal law enforcement always the goal, and the military was seeding the resume to do that or to build that that resume?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in the Washington D.C. area, and I figured I wanted to actually get away from that, and federal law enforcement allowed me to get assigned anywhere in the country. My luck, I'd have just gone right back to the Washington field office. I mean, but I figured something would, that would help me kind of springboard, a career. And then, of course, the Marine Corps, the military was going to be a resume builder. And at first I looked to join the Army. They really couldn't get their act together. And the Marine Corps snatched me right up off the street. The recruiters did a fabulous job about wearing dress blues and all this enticement. And as the old Jody goes, Mama told Johnny not to go downtown, and Ivan did, and the Marine Corps recruiter was hanging around, and that was it. In fact, I didn't ask a lot of questions, and they probably were like, damn, are there more of you? Like, this is making my job really, like, oh my gosh, man, you're so dumb. You don't even know. You don't even ask me. This is great. This is great. Welcome, sucker. I mean, brother. And, sign here, here, and here. So, yeah, I kind of had an idea, this sort of lofty idea of this, just kind of whimsically go through that. And then from there, I decided maybe I'd like to be a pilot, but I took the air test and found that I might be better suited to fill everyone up with gas, but I sure as shit wasn't going to fly one. So, I got pigeonholed pretty quick about where I was going to go.
A lot of us, I think, got hooked in with the Top Gun, right? We're the Top Gun generation, and we all thought we were going to be, naval aviators at some sort. Or
when I was growing up, my dad had a number of people. My dad studied leadership in the Army and kind of the trauma as the Army rebuilt itself, particularly its NCO Corps after the Vietnam War. And he wrote a book with his research partner called The Boys in the Barracks. And it focuses actually quite heavily on substance abuse and the breakdown of cohesion in the United States Army. And one of the things that he found in his research was that, it isn't to say it didn't happen in the Special Forces community, but they had much lower rates of insubordination. They had much lower rates of drug abuse. They had much, their cohesion was higher. And they tried to figure out, hey, what is it that this group has that the rest of the Army could adapt? It doesn't try to make everyone a Special Forces soldier. It was just saying, look, how do we revamp the way that we train and develop our because militaries honestly thrive on their NCO Corps. You can talk about the officership all you want, but you have to have a good non-commissioned officer corps, staff end, and at the user level E4 and above. And so he he looked very closely at that. So I was exposed to Green Berets and people who'd been involved in some pretty amazing stuff. Looking back on it, and it's not to say I was meeting, brand name guys like Stryker Meyer and some of these other people that they've heard of, but I met a lot of people who had been involved in some things, that they'd make movies about and read books about. And I was like, wow. So in my mind, the reason I wanted to do in the Army is because I was going to be a Green Beret. Now, how I was going to do that inside of 4 years in there, I didn't have a plan for that. I really don't. So, but when that didn't happen, I went to the Marine Corps, and they really sold me more on being a Marine than anything else. But I had been told of this other group within the Marine Corps that was very elite called Force Reconnaissance or Reconnaissance Marines, and that in the back of my mind actually was like, okay, well, that sounds like it's a pretty different, interesting culture within this system. But I didn't know anything about that when I first showed up. I'm kind of getting ahead of stuff, but that's kind of how, you asked about the genesis. It's coming in from different sides, and it all manifested.
I absolutely love that. I think that your fun part is your recruiting story is the more people that I interview, the more I find stories similar to my own as far as the Marine Corps recruiting. The Army guy wasn't there. And the Marines were looking sharp, and then I have no idea what I signed up for. That is generally the story that Marines.
They're fabulously trained. I mean, the professionally trained salesmen, they're fabulously invested in for what they do. And as we know, a Marine Corps recruiting mission you can't fail. And what I mean by that, it cannot fail. I mean, you can be fired, and there'll be, there's consequences, but that mission itself, they don't miss mission. They don't miss, getting who they need and how. The better qualified the candidate, so be it. But they're masters at salesmanship.
Absolutely. Okay, so I've got a follow-up question. I know when kind of researching a little bit on your website, I remember seeing you've been able to trace your family lineage back to the Civil War. So it seems like patriotism or serving your country at some level, although you said that your father didn't pressure you to join the military, but there was always this idea of service towards the country. Is that something that am I imagining that, or is that something that was kind of just laid through the generations, if you will?
Yes, I think in an indirect way it was. There has not been a drive through upbringing that this is what you will do. Although all of my family, my three children, two of them are serving in the military. One is married to a military officer, Marine pilot. Mm-hmm. So we don't make any money in the family business, but we're very proud of it. Their grandfathers served, their great grandfathers served. It just happened to be something that hasn't. We do instill that the country is worth defending. Although I will say that I've had a little bit of conscience wrestling as of late, just because of reconciling my own service and kind of where we are as a country, without getting again too far ahead in the interview. But I will say that the sense of duty, the sense that the country is worth defending because of its tenets and what it espouses to be or can be, is in my mind worthwhile. Now, how that is interpreted through others is one, largely out of our hands, but two, is something worth considering. But I have there's nothing where you come forward and tell people in the family, jingoistically, this country's the greatest thing ever. You need to serve for it. We do encourage it though. Like, hey, if that's a direction you want to go, then all right.
Well, I love that. I mean, it's also hard not to look at, again, like I said earlier in the pre-interview, like I've read a lot of your stuff, and I am just I'm like kind of a fanboy at this point. But like, if I had you as a dad, right, I would say like, well, I want what he has, right? So he's, obviously squared away, but intelligent, insightful, empathetic, has seen the world, real world experience. Like, why wouldn't I want to get that? And I see that thread happen a lot through military, families. I don't want to say dynasties, but military families. I actually think a lot of Marines that I've been around are not super forceful with saying you need to do this. In fact, it's quite the opposite. It's a lot more militant in their way of saying you need to understand what you're getting into if you do this. Or
for sure. I've told this story before, but it's true. But When I signed my paperwork, I signed it December 22nd, 1997. And I took my oath, and I told my dad that I was going to join the military. And I'm not sure he took me to, he see that I was serious about the project, but the thought of me actually committing and going to do that was something I don't know if he ever reconciled. Because then I went to his house. He was living in Silver Spring, Maryland, and I just signed up in Hyattsville. And I drove to his house about 10 o'clock in the morning. And I knock on the door, and he's, "Hey, what's going on?" It's pre-cell phone, he just kind of dropped by, and he's like, and I said, "Dad, I did it. I joined the Marine Corps." And his face just like dropped, like he was kind of like gobsmacked. And he said, well, I guess this calls for a drink. Now, my father was a recovered alcoholic, and he had a bottle of Jim Beam bourbon that he kept on a shelf that had been corked, and it was dusty. Like, it was the last drink he'd ever taken from this bottle, and he kept it on the shelf. I don't know how long this thing had been on his shelf. And I said, "Dad, you don't drink?" He goes, "It's not for me. It's for you."
Like, yeah, you about to
he's like,
brother.
I'm not the one who's going to need this. So I had the next drink out of that bottle before, I was the next Ingram to drink out of that bottle.
Okay, that's really cool. That's kind of, I myself struggled with alcohol abuse, and since ceased that during my career. But I completely understand. And again, there's like this interesting bond that shares over that. I think that's a really cool story. I appreciate you sharing that with us. Okay, so 1997. So you sign up. You said December 22nd, 1997. Yep. Okay, so when do you go to OCS?
25th of January, 1998.
So it's a little etched into your mind.
It is a very as far as that. quick chain of events.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. So then you go through OCS and TBS afterwards. And for any non-Marine listeners, right, there's Officer Candidate School, and then there's the basic school. Can you describe in your own words the difference that you saw between both of those two schools? And then I'm assuming, based on your job, that you went to IOC afterwards, the Infantry Officer course. Would you mind taking the viewers and the listeners through that kind of journey?
Sure. OCS is Officer Candidate School, also abbreviated for Organized Chicken Shit.
I've never heard that.
It is officer boot camp. It is also a selection course of sorts. It's very PT heavy. There's some very basic tactics and understanding of military studies, but you're really not being groomed for anything other than your suitability for becoming a commissioned officer. The washout rate is actually pretty high.
Okay.
Or at least at the time it was. I mean, certainly not everybody makes it through. Some people quit. Some people get trouble disciplinary wise. A lot of people get hurt. And then there's an academic and physical standard that you have to meet. And if you're not meeting it, they cut you away. So that's 10 weeks long. I was very fortunate in my OCS class to have a large number of prior enlisted candidates with me.
Oh, great.
And once they realized that I might actually survive this thing, they kind of put their arm around me, or like, "All right, listen, you're really motivated, but we got to channelize this thing that you are and help you through this." And that that really did kind of took me under their wing to better understand the Marine Corps process. From there, you go to basic school, which is also Quantico, or another part of Quantico. And that's 6 months long, and it is, they call it the basic officer course, and it just teaches newly minted lieutenants how to actually be a Marine Corps officer. And it does get into your tactics, and it does get into, your field problems, defense, offense, planning. And everyone goes through that regardless of if they're a ground contractor, they're a pilot, or even a JAG, a judge advocate, a lawyer. So everyone goes through it. They say every Marine a rifleman, and in this case, they want every Marine officer to be able to be a platoon commander. Make no mistake, that does not mean that every Marine is an infantryman, and every Marine who goes to the basic school is trained to be an infantry officer. But you are trained to be a leader, and you are trained to be able to take charge and grab a group of Marines and get something accomplished, to include fight if you have to. And that was evident. I mean, that was evidenced back in, just use an anecdote, 2012, 2013 timeframe, the attack on Bastion, where the Harriers were destroyed on the tarmac. Yes, there were a number of people defending that airfield, but the guy who led the main counterattack was a Harrier pilot himself. He'd actually been a JTAC friend of mine, and he grabbed a group of any Marines that he could and said, "We're going in to the fight," and he did. So, I mean, that's leadership from the front. That is irrespective of your training. As you know, I won't be doing this. That's one of the reasons they do what they do at infantry officer course, and that's also the reason that you have Marine artillery units serving as provincial infantry in Somalia and things like that. So that's the reason the basic course is set up that way. It teaches people to call for fire, do medevacs, stuff that honestly you think you may never have to use, and then it comes into play. So that's 6 months long. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh yeah. So when I'm sure you spoke with your father, when going through this, or wrote letters, I think probably the time frame, maybe the few phone calls home. One of the things I'm a graduate of TBS myself, and I went through after 15 years of being an enlisted Marine first, and I was able to now kind of finally realize the officer corps. That's almost, I think TBS itself, in my personal opinion, is kind of what makes the Marine Corps, right? It shows everyone that we are not just a cook, a baker, a candlestick maker, or an infantry Marine, and they are different, and separate parts. We are all underneath one war fighting banner, to effectively, locate and close with the destroy, right? And I don't know, did your conversations with your father, is the Army set up like that, or was his training something different than that?
At the time, no, it was not. The Army has actually gone to great lengths to develop what they call a BLOC, which is basic officers course for them. They call it Bullock, basically a basic officer leadership course. But it's still MOS focused. Whether you're a combat engineer or you go to your infantry school, Army's very big on having their particularly their infantry officers or combat arms officers go to Ranger School. That is a proving course to, as a mark of distinction to lead troops. So it is the same but different. The Army sources their officers a little bit differently than the Marine Corps does. Certainly, we're getting them from ROTC or NROTC. There's plenty of Naval Academy Marine option graduates who go, but everyone goes to the basic school, and the basic school is just that central commonality.
It's like a funnel.
Yeah, and the Army doesn't really do it that way. Like if you get commissioned from West Point, their curriculum there is completely focused on leadership training, whereas you go to ROTC at a college. Once you're commissioned, let's say you went to Notre Dame, you're not going to any sort of TBS. You're going to Fort Benning or whatever your MOS happens to be, and then you from there, kind of pick up and learn how to be in the Army. So the TBS is really good that way.
Kind of flatlines.
Yeah, it does. It brings everybody to as they say, the basic level of instruction. Then from there, you get your MOS, your military occupational specialty.
Did you choose anything other than what the one
I was told I could only work a loud and hot job, and the Marine and the infantry was like perfect for me. Carry heavy stuff, break things. I mean, I was custom, tight, tailor-made. No, I actually really did want to be an infantry officer. I did. I liked going to the field. I liked all the stuff that went with it. I took to it. Again, I had sort of this idea of getting into reconnaissance, and I was told, hey, you can't get there unless you become an infantry guy. And that's easy. I want to be one. And then if I didn't get that, I didn't know what I was going to do, because I was so like, well, this is literally all I wanted to do. And so I was fortunate.
That's another similar parallel with a lot of young Marines is like, I'm just going to send it. I have one option that I'm going to go for, and I don't know what failure means, right? And I think that's actually kind of a cool thing I think it sets you up for later on, right? There is no, it's like, I don't know, burning the boats or burning the ships, right? I don't have a second option. I'm going to do this.
No,
right?
This is where I'm going to fight it out right here. So yeah, I have good memories of basic school. And then from there we went to IOC. IOC is 10 weeks long. I spent a whole year at Quantico, basically just back to back, just training and working. So that worked really pretty well. And then, that took me to the end of 1998.
So now 24 years, you're able to see, a lot of the service, obviously. Do you think that IOC in the 90s versus what you know of IOC in the late 2000s and 2010s, do you think that there was a developmental shift or anything that you saw inside of IOC that were they adaptive, or is it the same curriculum that you saw in 1997?
It was it was adaptive. I believe, and now I haven't been to Ranger School, so I'm going to say this with a caveat, but I do believe that IOC produces the finest light infantry leader in the world. Based upon its training, live fire, its curriculum, they've expanded it. They've got a desert phase. They do a lot more with supporting arms than we did. We were trained in that regard. But, at that point in time, the most recent things that had happened were a little bit of stuff in Bosnia, maybe some Somalia vignettes or Haiti. But we didn't have anything like the baseline of combat experience that would not, come to define the Marine Corps and the American armed forces in general from, let's call it, about 2003 on. And so I was also not an instructor at Infantry Officer course, but I did go back there several times to see people who either were commissioned and graduating, or quite frankly, got to see how infantry officers served and fought in combat. And I realized that what they're being taught and how they're being resourced to enable them to make the decisions and fight the way that they do. Marine Corps is very big on teaching the fighter leader. You're a warrior, but your main weapon as a platoon commander is the Marines under your in your command. At least that's, in my mind, how you should see it. Although you better be able to fix bayonets and shoot. You have to be able to do all of that.
Correct.
So in that case, though, that ethos was alive and well, and I still think it's impressive.
Absolutely. Okay, cool. So you graduate IOC, I'm guessing now probably December-ish of 1998.
Yep.
And then heading to your first unit. What was your first unit?
I went to Camp Pendleton. I was in 1st Battalion, 4th Marines, and 1st Marine Division.
All right.
Yep.
Right on. Yeah. Big fan of 1-4. I spent some time associated with them overseas. Okay. So then what did you step into when you were with 1-4 for the first time as a new platoon commander? My first day there, I was presented with a congregate, which is a congressional investigation for misconduct by a bunch of my Marines. So that was my welcome. I don't know that they teach that in TBS.
No. That was in the fine print that I never bothered to read. You probably will see a trend here. Yeah. So I was met by my platoon sergeant. At first I was trying to go into my CP command post, and the staff sergeant comes walking in and goes, "Hey, where are you going?" And I said, "I'm inside. It's not like this or not." And he reaches up and he fixes my tie. And I was like, "Damn it!" And then I bent down to tie my shoe and pop the stitching on my pants. So those were, that's how I entered the CP. And as soon as I did, I went upstairs and met my XO, and that didn't go nearly as well as I'd hoped. And by the time I worked my way back downstairs, my then platoon sergeant, he's like, "Oh man, I'm glad to see you." And I thought, "Oh, this okay, finally." And this is some. And he said, "Well, here's the investigating paperwork."
Here's the stack of.
And I was going to have to do this, but today you got it, and tomorrow we're going to go see the battalion commander. But I'll be with you. Don't worry about it. I was like, right on. So yeah, that was welcome to the fleet.
Yeah, a lot of figure this out,
Yep.
right? I think that we do place a lot as an enlisted guy and then an officer later on. We place a lot of weight on young lieutenants' shoulders, and oftentimes without a lot of training, in specific things like the ancillary duties that they have to have inside of a unit is it's. I think it actually makes them, to your point, later on, and as far as your current career and where you're at as a consultant and as a lecturer and a leader, is I think that's also, I don't know that it's an intended effect, but it is something that teaches young officers to be able to solve any problem that they're faced with pretty early on without a lot of instruction. That was at least my experience of watching that kind of go through my career.
Yeah, I think it's you have to adapt, or there requires a great deal of adaptability. So I
Absolutely
had to. So
Just a quick word from myself before we dive back into this combat story. Many of you know our previous interviews with A.J. Pasciuti, Marine sniper, recon operator, and the man who tracked, hunted, and ultimately eliminated Iraq's deadliest sniper, Juba. This was an enemy responsible for deaths of over 100 Americans, some say up to 140, many of which were filmed and posted online. AJ, who was just a very humble, very young Marine at the time, took that fateful shot, putting an end to so much pain for so many families. He never took credit for it, and over the years that story's changed and been retold countless times. I'm incredibly proud to let you know that you can get your hands on AJ's new book, Dark Horse, Harnessing Hidden Potential in War and Life, a book I asked him to write after I interviewed him, immediately after I interviewed him. It's part memoir, part roadmap, a look at the lessons AJ learned through combat and throughout his career, and how they can help all of us find strength and purpose. If you enjoy Combat Story, you're going to love this book. To get a copy, head to combatstory.com/darkhorse. That's combatstory.com/darkhorse. It's packed with details and insights that we never got to cover in our interviews, and I know you're going to love it. Now, back to this combat story.
Okay, so first deployment. Did you do a MEU? Is it one of the Westpacks or something like that inside of Camp Pendleton? Or
yeah,
out
I did
of Camp Pendleton?
I did a Westpac out of 15th with 15th MEU.
Okay, so you chop to the 15th MEU, and then you go on a Westpac on the 15th MEU. Is that correct?
Yeah, we didn't have much in the way of tasking except that you're just going to go out and be forward deployed. We knew we would be going eventually to the Middle East to be part of Operation Southern Watch in Kuwait as a result of Gulf One, and kind of keeping the Iraqis north of their line of demarcation. Other than that, we had no real idea of what we were going to get into. And at that point in time in the world, you deployed for presence, but you weren't necessarily tasked with doing anything ahead of time. It wasn't like your MEUs were going straight into combat as they started later in Afghanistan and Iraq. So that's 2000, and my first real operation is humanitarian ops, although it was considered a combat op in East Timor in the Pacific. So that wasn't even really it was exciting because you were part of something interesting, but we didn't get into any action. Australians had long before taken care of that. In fact, I met Dave Kilcullen years later, and it turned out that we were there at about the same time. So I always blame Dave Kilcullen for taking my mission, but that's all right.
Okay, awesome. And so now you come back from the 15th MEU. Seems like it would be a kind of a fun deployment, something that unique to the time frame.
I brought my golf clubs with me, AJ.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
Different world back then. I'm sure.
It was.
Gosh,
I just didn't even think about it.
You got to see the full spectrum of the Marine Corps. My experience, I joined right after 9/11. And then, so all I knew was war, and then retired kind of when the war ended. And you had this opportunity to see the Marine Corps before we were at full scale war, go through all of this, and then, retire towards the end, or, at the end of the conflict. I'm really excited to hear about what you saw as the differences between the service, if the service changed or adapted or moved, along those lines.
Yes. I have to put, just to keep things in perspective, I joined, pre-war in Krulak's Marine Corps, and then subsequent commandants from there certainly changed the Corps, made changes to the Corps as it progressed. And I think in many ways for the better. I'm not so sure towards the end if some of those choices that were made were circumspect, but certainly on war footing, Marine Corps is a very, as you mentioned, adaptive organization. And it's hard to make a group that, almost 200,000 people, change your cultures and change the way that you do stuff. And so it takes some innovation, and it also takes a bit of time. So I think that the Marine ethos lends itself to that. But once I got into serving in MARSOC, which became a completely different world, I wasn't really in the line Marine Corps anymore. Mm-hmm. So that which I saw was kind of from a periphery, but I also felt those changes within the organization in MARSOC itself in different ways.
So after your first deployment, based on what I know about that time in the service, you had now met the requirements to take a recon indoc. Is that the path that you took? Is that you continue down that pathway and kind of accomplish that goal of becoming a reconnaissance Marine?
Yeah, I took the recon indoc actually before I went on deployment to set myself up to then come back. And I did want to go to First Force, but they did not have any officer slots. So I went to First Recon at the time company, and they did. And I took the indoc. My battalion commander was supportive, and then sent me or got me make orders when I got back to go to First Recon, and I checked in there.
So when did you check into First Recon Battalion?
The fall of 2000.
Oh wow. Okay. All right. So now I have to ask the elephant in the room. Like, okay, so you're in First Recon in 2000. Where were you on September 11th? And can you describe what that was like? Wherever you were at witnessing that.
Well, I was at First Recon. I was not deployed. In fact, I was earmarked to support RCT deployment if it went. But that was all part of just a kind of ethereal plan. Like if this regiment had to go out, you would be assigned to it. And that was just part of the way that we were training at the time. It was 7th Marines that my platoon was attached to be their regimental reconnaissance, which would have been great. But that's not what happened. So I was there. Yeah, I was living in Camp Pendleton when 9/11 occurred, and there were recon units that were already deployed on Muse that then went into Afghanistan shortly afterward. All of us were watching how that unfolded. And so I, like the rest of us in the unit, just sat and watched it unfold and stood by waiting to see what was going to happen next.
So what was the mood at First Recon when like that? So again, I wasn't active duty at the time. I was in high school. What was the mood like while being active duty watching this kind of thing happen?
Let's go get these guys. Let's go get to work. And when we started hearing about platoons that were forward deployed and actually started getting into action and doing things, we were like, damn it. Good for them, but boy, do we wish we were part of that. And we looked pretty hard at our training. We looked pretty hard at our equipment and just started getting things ready because we just didn't know what was going to happen. And that took us all the way through 2001 and into 2002. And I unfortunately was unable to take my recon platoon to war because I was given orders at that point in time in summer 2002. So
where did you take orders to?
I went to the Infantry Reconnaissance School. So if I had to be sent somewhere, at least I got to train and be around Recon Marines. But there were a number of us who were training Recon Marines with big pouty faces.
Oh, man. God. So was that, you said ARS that was?
Yeah, the East Coast.
Okay. So my friends of mine call that actual recon school and not baby recon school.
Yeah, well, I'm both. I'm both the president and the client. I went to BRC, and then I became the XO at ARS. So I've done both. Each has its pluses and minuses.
Sure.
And I mean, that's a reason they consolidated all the recon training on the West Coast.
Yeah.
It did make sense for them to do so, although a little bit bittersweet to drive by what's now called McSkig, which was the old compound there, which I and others helped build and manifest or manage and maintain, and then it got repurposed for Marine Corps stuff. There's plenty of options.
That is one of the hard things, is like going back and seeing things that you like literally put your blood, sweat, and tears into building something. I at Scout Sniper School, Camp Pendleton. I mean, it's boarded up, right? And I was a student there. I was an instructor there.
Yep.
I painted the walls, and I look at it and I'm like, so there's like this, I understand progress, but man, it's really hard to be in the midst of progress when you have built something that you felt was going to last for a long time. I can definitely empathize with that.
Yeah. I mean, we named the place Kaufman Hall after Buck Kaufman, or the Navy Cross recipient, Reconnaissance Marine. Anyway, so there was just a huge, that was a little bit of a letdown.
Sure.
But I was there from 02 to 05. And I remember, not only do I remember 9/11, but I also remember watching OIF kickoff on TV while we were, we trained guys who then were in reconnaissance units that went into combat.
Yeah, and like watching that guy, whoever that was, that survived the court-martial, then step off on the line of departure.
Oh, yeah.
You're like, I might have done things differently.
Well, the system's the system. And, he was within his rights as a Marine to request that he did. So.
That's fantastic. Okay, so then so you do 3 years, so now 2005 timeframe. And from my recollection, we had... I'll let you kind of describe what was going on. Is that when you made the crossover to MARSOC? I know that started in 2006-ish. Or where did you go in between before? Because I know that you ended up over at MARSOC and became a Raider. What was the process before that happened?
So I went to Second Force after ARS. And in fact, I was told I wouldn't have a career if I did that because of an infantry officer. And it's like, hey, if you don't take infantry company command, it's over. But, if that's what you want to do. I couldn't thank my monitor at the time enough for actually doing that for me. But I had to submit a letter writing that I knew that I was taking a huge risk. But I'd known a few people who had done it and come out okay. And I just figured, okay, well, this is where I want to serve. This is what I like doing. There's a place open. Or slots open, and I wanted to be a Force Recon Marine, and so therefore that's going to not only a reconnaissance Marine, but this is where I want to serve. So I went there. I did not, I forewent Marine Infantry Company Command and took a platoon. And at the time, right around 2003, the Marine SOCOM Det 1, Detachment 1 had been activated and was doing stuff over in Iraq in support of U.S. SOCOM, and had demonstrated the Marine Corps could put together not only, well, that was a super unit for one, but two.
Yes, steak eaters in that one. I know
there's some bloody legends in that group of people from the commander on down. But they acquitted themselves very well, and so at that point, Det 1 was sort of completing its genesis, or it was the genesis for what became MARSOC, but they were completing its inaugural deployment, looking to get more work, looking to become the baseline of what would form MARSOC. And then it was, in classic Marine Corps fashion, it was stood down, and then they decided to build MARSOC out of hide a little bit later. So I was in Force Recon in 2005, and then they stood up MARSOC in 2006. So I, again, was going to be attached to MU as part of my platoon. There was two wars going on now, or two front war going on in Afghanistan and Iraq. And I figured, okay, we'll finally get into with people that, have done this. And the platoon I checked into had just come back from the first Fallujah. And I've said this before, but I was like, if I was a new lieutenant or captain checking into the 101st Airborne after they got back from Normandy, I mean, I was just shit. How do I lead these guys? What do I do?
Okay, so let's talk about. I got to dive into that, because this is something that I dealt with a ton as later in my career. So I was a gunner before I retired, and that was often the question that I would get from a lot of young lieutenants who would come into, how the gunner can be, right? If he's not a total jerk, right? He's kind of like the lieutenant whisperer, right? And so that was the question that I had. How do I lead these Marines? How do I take charge of these Marines when they've done the thing and I've only practiced the thing? How did you overcome that? Was there NCO leadership? Was there, how did you, I'm sure that there was some level of imposter syndrome that you had. How did you overcome those things? Because this is what I think is, to me, is like really the essence of leadership. How do you take something where in our gun club, there is haves and have-nots. And at this point, you have gone through all the training, all the things. You are the thing, but in this weird classification, they may see you as a have-not. How did you overcome that?
Well, you're right in that it's a feeling of imposter syndrome. Even though I had all the schools and I had been trained in the same way that they had, I knew some of these guys, both from the West Coast and people that I trained in combat or trained who had been to combat and returned. And there were people that who were my former students who, you know, as they saw me coming through, they're like, "Hey, buddy, how you doing?" You know, like, so my own self-conscious feelings had to be put to the side. And I had a feeling that, you know, what people were judging me on not only how I would perform as we trained, but they didn't know how I'd perform in combat. But I don't think anybody knows that ahead of time. But there was also no guarantee that I wouldn't. And there was also no precedent to say that I couldn't do the job. And so at that point, I was like, look, I need to lead this unit, but I have to be circumspect. I have to be careful in how I approach it, because it can't just be like an infantry unit, because there was way too much experience inside of the organization. But then when we stood up to MARSOC, we almost doubled the number of staff NCOs within my platoon, because we became a direct action assault platoon based upon which was an amazing experience. But now I've got, 5 gunnery sergeants running around, and my platoon sergeant's a master sergeant, and they're all combat vets. And then, like, from the staff sergeant up, they're all combat vets with very few exceptions. And if they're not with recon combat vets, they've gotten combat with infantry units, which arguably has done more than a force reconnaissance unit in combat. Like, they fixed bayonets against the enemy. And I was briefed by a guy named Blackjack Matthews, who led Navy Cross recipient and led, I want to say, one of the battalions in 5th Marines in the Battle of Way. But he said when he gave the order to fix bayonets that it was one of the toughest he ever given, because someone on either end of that rifle was going to die.
Yeah.
And so we had guys who literally, like, fought people in a hand-to-hand combat, who are now, picking their teeth with their K-bar, looking at me like, what are you going to teach me? What are we going to learn? But organizations need leadership. And the way I approached it was that there was a lot I didn't know. There were things about me that they didn't know, and we had to be able to form a team, and it had to be formed quickly. And I would take things under advisement and listen to what they had to say. Ultimately, the decision was mine. And when the decision was made, we went forward. And it didn't mean that we didn't have, quite frankly, some heated discussions behind the doors. But when we came out unified front in front of the boys, that's just how it went. And there was never any playing of favorites, and there was never any sort of parochialism. Now, some of that was a little, or at least from my side, working downward. Cliques and other things form within units, and that happens. But we didn't have this, as you said, have and have nots. Like, if you haven't been in combat, you can only go over here. Everyone was expected to be trained to a certain level, perform at that level, and then maintain that level of proficiency. And it didn't matter who you were. And Delta approaches this the same way. They don't care if you're a truck driver, a tank mechanic, or the Rangers, the best Ranger. When you show up there, everyone is trained exactly the same, and they don't give a shit if you've got, a Medal of Honor, or you just got 2 ribbons. If you can perform and do the job, then that's what you're there to do. And that's how we very, very much approach it there. It takes a lot of maturity to take that. And also, as a leader, it takes a lot of humility to sit there and go, okay, I really don't know what I don't know, and I need some help. People can be taking advantage of that. Perhaps I was over the course of my career, but I like to think I probably had more wins than losses in that regard.
So now you're with 2nd Force, which has now transitioned. Portions of it have stood up into what would be 2nd Raider Battalion, or 2nd MARSOC, 2nd MSOB at the time?
Yeah, so they took all of 1st and 2nd Recon, or Force Recon, and made them the nucleus for 1st and 2nd Marine Special Operations Battalion, the MSOB. It doesn't become Raiders until much later, although that's a moniker that almost immediately begins to, be taken on, particularly because the World War II Raiders wanted a legacy to continue to continue their stolen history, and they kind of started adopting us everywhere. But so that happens in 2006. The nucleus for those two battalions, a third battalion stood up eventually out of what was called the Foreign Military Training Unit, FMTU. So yeah, you've got all these disparate groups of people, or groups of Marines who are now coming together to form something that hasn't been done before. And you talk about evolution, we're just beginning to have a selection process. There isn't an operator training course yet. There's a bunch of things that have yet to be built, not only structurally, but also infrastructure, as far as buildings and, the massive MARSOC compound that's down in Camp Lejeune, that didn't exist. In fact, that was a land nav course they used for the sniper course down there as well, as a matter of fact. So yeah, all of that is yet to be built and put together. So it was an interesting time for sure. And again, it's one of those things where we don't know what's going to happen, but we're now working for SOCOM, kind of cutting out a lot of the backstory on this. But we basically are not working for the Marine Corps. We're Marines who are now working for SOCOM, and we got to remember that Donald Rumsfeld told Hagee at the time, Commandant, hey, you're doing this, so go do it. Not like, well, we need to do an assessment. No, that wasn't happening. So we stood it, then
the time for analysis was over. The time for action.
Yeah, and it was a situation that the Marine Corps was standing up something it didn't want to, and they were under no obligation to do it as well as it could be done out the gate. They did pretty well as far as grabbing, us all, but they're still, I will say that the MARSOC that's developed now 20 years later is pretty impressive.
I think that I've got so many questions to, in regards to the kind of I think growing pains has a negative connotation to it, but the forming of a new dynamic team. So when MARSOC stood up, right, what was some of the biggest like cultural friction points? So you came from Recon, you came from the infantry, and now you are classified as special operations. Were you accepted by SOCOM as special operations? Were you accepted by the Marine Corps as special operations? Were you accepted by Recon as something, as something different? What was that transition like?
I think there was a lot of reticence within the SOCOM community to accept this. I think at face value, they took the Force Recon thing, just saying, okay, you've got the right attitude as far as you do run a selection of sorts. You are focused in your training, but unlike Army Special Forces, so there's SOF, right? Special Operations Forces, and then you've got Special Forces, and the Army is very particular about their charter and who gets to be called that, and rightfully so. Long-time guys have earned that. But SOCOM wanted to make sure that we were more than just a combat raiding force, which is what we were best suited to do, to be quite frank. But they wanted a little more the ability within SOCOM to spread load the mission, particularly the advise, train, and assist mission around both Afghanistan and Iraq, and also in other parts of the world. It's still a huge footprint for SOF. And so there were some limitations there within our own training structure. It's one of the reasons FMTU was absorbed into that, to kind of get ahead of what would eventually become a more holistic training program. But we had these two very aggressive warfighting battalions, if you will. And then you had sort of this other unit of FMTU guys that were doing all of the not so sexy stuff, but arguably more important in other places in the world. And so you want to talk about have and have nots, or, feeling, he's just first FMTU, or he's just a third battalion guy. That was not the right way to approach that. But it is growing pains. You have to, we were building this on the move and trying to go to war in different places. We eventually spent MARSOC spent most of their time in Afghanistan. And it isn't to say there are people who weren't serving elsewhere, but then when you talk about the recon community, because they took us all Force Recon guys out of and essentially disbanded First and Second Force, only to stand them up a little bit later as their original components within the reconnaissance battalions, reconnaissance formations. And it's interesting because we were both First and Second Force, and we took all the paddles and lineage from those units with us as we became First and Second MSOB. And then when they stood First and Second Force back up, the 0321 community was like, hey, give us our shit back.
Yeah, that was tough. I remember now hindsight is a fantastic thing, right? And then a little bit of gray hair on the side helps. But I remember I was at at Second Force in 2010s when I checked into Second Force. And there was, my best friend in the entire world is currently the 0372 monitor. And so we were both in 3.5 together. And so we had this he went over to the FMTU or third MSOAG, I think it was at the time, and then, progressed through there. Did a whole bunch of really cool deployments. Yes. And then I went over to Recon and then Force Recon. And so we would often try to out-cool each other. We would send each other pictures from wherever we were at in the world, but there was always this silent, we just didn't talk about it. Sometimes it's when people have different political opinions, we're like, hey, I love you, but I'm just not going to talk about how these are our paddles, right?
The operative word is culture. We had to develop our own, while at the same time, none of us could turn our backs on being in the recon community, 0321s. And there were people who, after doing some time with MARSOC, or even as the offer came around, they said, I like being an 0321, I like being a Recon Marine. I want to stay with the Marine Corps. Mm-hmm. And so you talk about kind of some of the problems that we ran into as we're not only building, but growing and developing a reputation within SOCOM. They were unsure of what we could do and how we would perform. And they weren't really taking us seriously in some regards. And then you had your parent organization, your parent service, who didn't want you around or didn't want you. They wanted you as Marines, but they didn't want you to be
the redheaded stepchildren.
Absolutely,
of the Marine Corps. It was
they were just like, okay, well, we didn't ask for this, we didn't want this, and if you're off doing that, then you're SOCOM's issue. And there was money, there was resourcing, there was equipping, all kinds of things that we were enjoying in a way that most Marines did not. And I think one of the bigger things that the Marine Corps has done well is maintaining the MAR in SOC, the Marine Corps part of it, because that ethos does lend itself to a highly disciplined organization, which is good. But I think that it probably could have been a better lean to saying, oh, well, if we got this group that does this stuff for MARSOC, or called MARSOC, well, that could get the rest of our Marines involved in this in ways that other soft forces just could not do. And that includes whether it's humanitarian aid or, helping with training. It's one thing to say, okay, I've got a guy who, you say Army parlance, you send them to the 18 Bravo weapons course, and they're supposed to be the subject matter weapons expert in all things NATO and Warsaw Pact weapon systems. But they're not going to be able to train how to do, no kidding, mortar gunnery better than a Marine 0341.
Right.
So that's who I used. When we needed mortar training, I didn't say, okay, go get a manual. We went to an infantry unit and said, hey, we need to learn how to do this, because we were deploying with mortars. The Marines were like, okay, we'll do that. And, within a week, our guys were doing just fine and learning how to do stuff. But, there's something to be said for specialties that is worth tapping into, and worth acknowledging and working with, even within your own service. So there were some missed opportunities there, I think, in a lot of ways. And it was a little bit of a struggle to not only demonstrate your competence, but also that to your service that you were relevant. And we got a lot of pushback. Even I got pushback from guys in the infantry. Like, there's nothing you're doing that we couldn't do. I don't understand why we stood this thing up. This is pointless. Like, okay, well, that's great, but where's the Marine Corps doing to advocate for the missions for you to get in there and do that? Because we had a whole new we had a whole MEU sitting off the coast of Afghanistan right after 9/11, and instead they flew an entire assault squadron from Delta on and cleared an entire aircraft carrier to fly them 9 hours into Afghanistan to do that raid. And the first phone call was not to the MEU. So if we really have our shit together, we're that good, what are we doing?
And that was the real golden child of the Marine Corps, right? That is what we, expeditionary operations.
Heck yeah.
That was and so when that doesn't get
moment's notice.
Yeah, exactly. So that when that doesn't get used, that became my own personal experience. That became kind of a trend. Was a lot of times naval shipping or marine, slated vessels would just be turned into, a lily pad for highly specialized units when the MEU had all those things. And that was it was a lot of different sandboxes that people were trying to play in. It was an interesting dynamic.
Well, that comes down to, just taking this in one direction for a moment. I mean, that comes down to branding and confidence. That's really what it comes down to is just those units have a high degree of branding, and they have the people who employ them have a high level of confidence for a good reason in what they can do. And when you're recompositing your MEUs every 18 to 24 months and you're having to retrain and rebuild, yes, you have a base level of skill that you can go and do certain things. But when you have standing forces like the 160th, and that's all they do, I like Marine aviation pilots, and if I want something destroyed, I want U.S. Marine infantry to make it pea-sized rubble. They'll do it better than the Rangers. They can destroy an anvil, and that's fine. That's exactly who I want. But you're talking about specific kinds of application,
almost like a dagger,
and in the Marine Corps,
versus a broadsword.
Yes.
So I have a question. So let's talk about the dagger. That's something that's very, very true to this, symbolism that you use as raiders. Can you explain a little bit more of the dagger?
There was adapted off of what was called the Fairbairn Sykes dagger, like that, which was developed as a close combat weapon in the Second World War. And then the Marine Raider knife was inspired by that as a commando, because this is what was issued to the commandos in World War II, where a type like this one's actually a later issue model, but the ones, and of course the Raiders also had a belt knife, sort of a larger K-bar looking thing, but the Raider stiletto was developed specifically, in the same vein as the Fairbairn Sykes dagger.
That's awesome.
And that goes all the way back to World War II.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so now you are with 2nd MSOB at the time, and you're ready for your first deployment. When do you go, and where do you go, and who do you take with you?
At the time we went to Afghanistan, we were the companies were organized very differently than they are now. At the time, we had a direct action special reconnaissance platoon. It consisted of 45 O321s and SARCs. Special Amphibious Reconnaissance Corpsmen. It was a very unique way of developing or organizing a unit. Tons of experience, and you almost exclusively had to be selected to be in it. I mean, you were assigned, but you also had to prove that you could be part of this thing. And we had 5-man assault teams and 4 squads of 10. And then you have 5-man headquarters element, and then you had some other attachments that came with it. So that was the core, was the DASR platoon. And then attached to that was an infantry platoon, which would be unfairly characterized as a trailer platoon. That's what they used to call them back in the day. They kind of, quote unquote, trailed behind a Force Recon platoon and provided security and allowed them to do their jobs on objectives. But in this case, they were gunners and drivers. Some of these guys had been in Ramadi. They'd had combat experience too. So you couldn't just sneer at these guys for being grunts. They had their own level of expertise. And then within, so you had the infantry platoon as well. And then you also had a headquarters platoon, which was led by a major and had a very robust intelligence section, as well as EOD and all kinds of enablers, mechanics, et cetera.
You guys are like combat in a box, is what it seems like.
Yeah, and we rolled around in what was called GMVs, which were custom-built Humvee variant gun trucks. And we went to Afghanistan in 2007, and that was our first deployment as Gulf Company. That's who I was a member of. The Fox Company had been there beforehand, and they'd gotten into a pretty good scrape out in the east. And then that's unfortunately ended in a little bit of ignominy, which they had to work through. And I think that's been covered plenty of times. But we deployed in the wake of that. And that was one more thing, the SOF community, particularly the Army SOF community, were like, well, who are these guys? Like, what?
Just added on, right? To this. Like,
yep. Well, and they assigned SF units to us to sort of, they were supposed to show us the ropes, if you will, but they were there to keep tabs on us. I mean, there's no other way around it. But the guys we work with are pretty squared away, at least the guy from some Special Forces group.
Just a quick word from our sponsor, Veterans Help Group, and we'll get right back to this episode. Some of you may be struggling with things today that weren't there before you deployed. Or maybe you're noticing this in a loved one, a spouse, a son, a daughter who went downrange and came back a little different, with trouble sleeping, dealing with pain, stress, mental health issues, and maybe a whole lot more. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Let me tell you, you signed that contract, you served your country, you earned your benefits, and that's why I want you to do yourself a favor and call my friends at the Veterans Help Group today. They're here to help you get your benefits. I've navigated the VA system to get my own benefits, and it can be hard at times, and the Veterans Help Group makes it that much easier. The Veterans Help Group knows the VA because VA disability is all they do. Whether you've been denied, or appealing, or filing for the first time, it doesn't matter. These guys know how to get you approved for 100% of the benefits you deserve. They've done it for thousands of vets just like you and your loved ones who served. Go to veteranshelpgroup.com or call Veterans Help Group at 855-231-6144 and tell them your buddies Ryan and AJ from Combat Stories sent you. That's veteranshelpgroup.com. Veterans Help Group does not guarantee outcomes, and past performance does not guarantee future results. The company is neither a law firm nor affiliated with any part of the U.S. government, including the VA. And now, back to this episode.
So what was that deployment like? Where are you at in Afghanistan?
We're in the Helmand, outside of Lashkar Gah, in Musa Kala Valley. It's a very extremely violent area, Taliban hotbed. I would equate it to just being in the Wild West, AJ. It was like, to that point, I had not experienced any real combat. I'd done that one sort of combat mission in East Timor, meaning I had live ammunition and grenade and flying around helicopters and kind of looking at humanitarian sites. You might get into something, but that was not necessarily combat. I certainly had no direct action combat, no direct combat like all the majority of my guys did. Like I said, including some of these infantry guys. And then we got there, and we were still really getting into, this is before it was called VSO, or Village Stability Ops. We were just really working on operating bases and going out and finding the enemy and fighting them as hard as we could in the effort of just kind of getting Taliban on their heels for what would hopefully be a larger offensive that eventually manifested in more Marines, SMUs, et cetera, coming in on behind us. But at that point in time, we were just out there as a raid force, combat force, looking for fights,
right?
Yeah, or they picked them with us. There was no shortage. You could get in what's called a tick, troops in contact situation, literally on demand. Wouldn't take very long.
Can you describe some of those engagements, or a couple in particular that life-changing things that were a culmination of a lot of training, and like, here you are at the moment, you're in the gate, right? And what do you do?
I won't say that I was in so many I can't remember, right? But there was a lot of them, and some of them are more protracted than others. But two in particular, we're actually trying to take down this Taliban commander inside of this area. And, as far as the organization chart, it'd be like taking out a colonel or even a brigadier general, depending on how you looked at it. So we're always trying to get this guy, and, you could hear him on the radio, and we always figured, okay, if we could just take him out, then we would probably be able to just piecemeal or turn his unit into a piecemeal unit and make it just be easier for us to fight them. So we tried some direct raids looking for this guy, or at least developing intelligence. But at other times, we would just be out and we'd get into a fight, and we could hear him and just say, okay, maybe we can vector him, and we'll try and get him. But in one part, we were trying to get down into what's known as the green zone, which is where most of the Afghan villages reside along riverbeds. And that's where most people live because it's obviously a source of water. It also allows them to have irrigation for their crops, support their animals and families. But they also make fabulous trench lines, and the Taliban was very adept at using them. They also had quite an ability to fight with defense and depth, and they were fairly well organized when it came time to get into larger fights. And they could mass some people pretty quickly. So my platoon and I had been tasked to drive down and take over this compound on the edge of the green zone, which is up on a little bit of a rise so we could get a higher piece of dominating terrain to actually then use that as a jump off point as you're going to try and push further into the green zone. And it's a 5-vehicle convoy. And as we drive down into it, all hell just literally broke loose on us. And there's a saying that if your attack's going well, you're in an ambush. And my attack was going famously, AJ, like amazing. And RPG round bounced off the hood of the truck and blew up behind us. It was just insane. So we had been trained in immediate action drills, and guys, turned to and started firing with the turret guns. People dismounted and started doing like bounds towards these enemy positions. The enemy had been thinking like, these guys are absolutely insane. Because the tactic, if you're in a close ambush, is to fight through it. Otherwise, you're just going to get shot to pieces. And so that's what they did. The Marines just got out, dismounted the trucks, and just started going at it with these guys. And I can still vividly see a dude standing, firing his saw from the offhand in short bursts,
just owning it,
going like, I mean, it just, and I can see his face. He wore a ball cap underneath his helmet, and I can see the ball. Just all these weird things that come up, and so I jumped out to help with this fight. And as I'm getting out, I go to run around the other side of the truck because I wanted to get there and actually get on the radios. Now, I wanted to be out and able. You were talking about that fighter leader thing where you're out and able to have command and control. I really couldn't do that from inside the vehicle, even though I had better communications inside of the vehicle. I could still operate my radios off of my body. And as I'm getting out, I hear this, "Sir, could you shut the door?" Like, it is the most calm statement, and it's my driver. And I'm like 2 steps down the GMV. I'm like, "Oh yeah." So I walk back and I shut. Right. There's bullets flying. Yeah, sir. Just if as a point of fact, it would just really help me to not get shot if you would shut the armor-plated door for me. Yeah, thank you. So I'm like, "Oh, my bad." So then I go running across, and over the top of my head, my interpreter has his AK. He's just perched it on the top of the armor plate, and is just firing bursts. He's scared shitless, but he's like, I'm going to do something. So I'm like ducking. I can this is booming over my head. The 50 cal's going off. It is chaos. And I run around the other side and I call, my hire and say, "Hey, we're in a pretty good situation. We're a sticky situation, and we need to get out of here." He goes, "Yeah, you have my approval." And I was kind of like, "I'm not asking.
I'm telling you what's happening.
This is what we are going to do." So we passed that over the radio to everybody. And now I've got to think about all these guys who've dismounted to go fight. I don't know if anybody's in these trench lines or whatever. So I'm like, get everyone back. But it was like, even as crazy as the cacophony is of all the gunfire, and you can hear the bullets smacking off of the plating and everything, the clarity that I somehow manufactured, it developed, was just amazing. And you can't train for that. And I don't know what happened there. People know me, I can be excitable, and somebody's going, "You can, dude."
Yeah. I've been accused of the same thing. Yeah. Don't worry.
How would I put it? I'm passionate. So we're in a passionate situation there. And I then remember, as I'm getting ready to go back around the vehicle, I then remember that I've been, some training that we had from some people who were helping us out before we deployed. Some of them were former CAD guys, and some of them were our own people who'd been in combat. And one of them was a guy named Master Sergeant Eden Pearl, who succumbed to his wounds a number of years ago, unfortunately. But at the time, he'd been a mentor to me. And he's like, hey, if you are behind some cover that you haven't cleared, even though you were on the other side of it, you need to re-clear that, meaning you need to make sure it's safe. You can't just assume that it's safe on the other side of that, because you don't know. And I don't know. I had the presence of mind to be like, don't run around this vehicle right now. Like, you need to, like they call it, pawing it off. Like you break down the sectors that you can see and keep yourself protected. And I leaned around the corner and there's 3 guys running down the edge of this trench line with a PKM, and I just shot all of them.
No way.
And they went,
I mean, like, what a, and again, had you have come around that corner without, the lessons from somebody beforehand, would have exposed you to an open bolt weapon system, right?
Well, they weren't employing it. They were running, like the guy had it over his shoulder. They had already gunned from somewhere else, and they were then moving. But that doesn't matter. I mean, there was other people there, who gave it, but they themselves could have been employing that pretty quickly. But yeah,
I will give the Taliban a little bit of credit. Like, anytime that they were fantastic at finding, fixing, and flanking us,
totally.
as if they read our own doctrine and then knew how we were going to fight, and then worked against that as well.
Yeah, they had put mortar rounds, indirect fire on a support by fire position I had behind me to make them displace ahead of us getting into this ambush. I mean, it was very well prepared. They've been watching us during the day. I'm not sure, aside from overhead, this is why battlefield drones are great. Like, if we had some ability to throw something up there and go, take a look at what was out in front of us, that might have helped us here. But in this case, we were just, fire in close combat. So yeah, and so at that point, then I ran back around and fired a few more rounds into the trench and got back in the vehicle. And so this is all happening in like a compressed period of time. And we're trying to turn these vehicles around and get out of this thing. My JTAC during the time has calmly opened the door and like prepared his 9-line, and he's got out a smoke grenade so he can mark our position. Like, he's doing all these things that I would be thinking like, hey, do this. And he's just already, and he's a Harrier pilot. He hasn't done any, he hasn't, done the ground and done ground combat. In fact, when I remember him getting off the aircraft and he still had his bright captain's bars on and his flight wings. And I was like, take that shit off. Like, you can't be wandering around here with us. Like, he was out of a movie. Like, So, but yeah, I mean, he does everything he's supposed to do. We get in the vehicles, we start to turn around, and he rolls down the window so he can put his rifle out, like and start shooting from inside of the vehicle. And it's loud as shit. And I'm like, what are you doing?
I'm helping.
He looks at me like, what? And the brass hit my driver on the back of the neck. And he's like, sir, can you stop doing that? And I was like, what is wrong with you? And like, we're having like this philosophical discussion about why he's returning fire in a firefight. I'm like, we have a gun up top. There's a pin mounted 240 that's now got an ag. We don't
You're
need
not helping.
We don't need this interior help right now. And because he was using a close quarter battle, it's only about a 10.5-inch barrel. So it's really short and it's really freaking loud. So I was just like, oh my gosh. So then over the radio, I hear like, hey, one of our vehicles is stuck, but it's much more emotional than that. It's like, oh my God, I don't know if we can get out here. Now these GMBs are in, they weigh a lot, like 7 tons, maybe 10 tons with all the ammo and everything. And the back wheel had hooked on this drop off that was on the edge of the road. And I'm like, great. Now we are, the word fixed. The technical term is fucked. I was like, man, what damn it. So because they're right behind me, our SOP is that we're the ones who then would hook up the tow ropes from there. So as I'm getting ready to exit the door again, luckily this is now on the safe side because we're now facing the opposite direction. The hand of God, I don't know, comes down and lifts this truck out. Now, we had all been sent to driver training before we went, but both on and off road. And one of the reasons we did that is because one of the highest casualty producers in both theaters was vehicle rollovers and vehicle accidents. So we want everybody to be able to know how to drive. And we sent both the infantry and the DASR guys to that training. We did it together. So this guy learned, he's feathering, he's braking, he's working, and he just gets this thing out, and you hear this, "We're free, go!" And as we are driving away, another RPG hits and blows up. Like, why it took them that long to get the RPG back in action? Well, maybe it didn't, but it doesn't really matter. And we speed out of this thing, and we get back to another covered shield position. And my commander looks at me and he's like, "Is everyone all right?" And I'm like, "I have no idea. Like, I know we got accountability as we were leaving, but we need to, like, no kidding, see what happened here. I haven't got any like, I don't have, the ammo ACE report, ammo casualty expenditure, anything like that." So he just had like this look on his face, like, I can't believe what I just witnessed. And I was like, "Yeah, you will try living through it. Like, this was crazy." And at the time, and so the JTAC has actually popped this purple smoke grenade. And again, everyone's making sense, like, "Oh, do you have any other color? Great, buddy." Like now we're all joking, purple. And I'm like, "What?" and two A-10s show up and they pulverize this line, and it breaks the back of this. Like, we broke the back of the ambush, and then it absolutely just tears this place up. And then after that, we got an AC-130 on station a little bit later and pummeled them, quite a bit more.
I'm going to have to pause you on that. I wanted to ask. So a lot of our viewers and listeners haven't had the experience of seeing an A-10 go in, wings level at a target. Can you describe that a little bit more? What that process, what that sight, what the sound was like, right? That specific weapon system itself.
Yeah, it's pretty surreal, actually. And it was getting on to where, I mean, when this ambush happened, it was at dusk. Well, not quite dark enough that we could use night vision goggles, which is another reason that they attacked us at that point, because they realized that if it was nighttime, we had complete tactical advantage with our NVGs and lasers and stuff. So we got it. It hit at dusk, and then as we were working our way back out, by the time the A-10 showed up, it's now just getting into that twilight darkness. But the A-10 as a platform is a purpose-designed close air support platform that was at one time on the chopping block to be decommissioned, but they may be bringing it back. I'm not sure.
I've heard both. Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard both as well. I wrote an article about defending the reason to keep the A-10, published a number of years ago. I think it was in the Havoc Journal. People can look that up. But the aircraft was essentially built around a 30 millimeter cannon that was developed by, of all things, General Electric, whose motto is, "We bring good things to life." So the 30 millimeter cannon is an absolute, it's meant for destroying tanks. But the payload of this aircraft, it has a titanium tub, armored tub, that protects the pilot. And then its payload is unbelievable. It can take off from short runways. It's meant to be flown in austere environments. It's actually quite perfect for worldwide combat. And the Marine Corps probably should just buy it because it's
Could
great.
You imagine that?
Or
as
SOF.
an attack platform?
SOCOM could just buy it and have their own organic attack platform. Just take the whole thing and just turn it into a SOCOM, AVSOF wing. That's an opinion. But it'd be really problematic to lose all the close air support knowledge within the Air Force, particularly within that community, because they're the ones who actually do ground combat or support ground combat forces with close air support. And we're assured by Air Force tacticians that the F-22 can deliver and do everything the A-10 can, and you don't have to worry about it. But the F-22 is a very delicate aircraft. It doesn't have nearly the payload. The pilots who fly it are not either, they're obviously quite skilled and capable, but they don't have that close air support capability, and they're not going to break a hard deck for fear of actually damaging the aircraft. Whereas the A-10 is purposely built to weave at less than 10,000 feet. And these guys came screaming in at somewhere like 1,000 feet. In fact, from where I was standing, I probably could, if it was daylight, would have been able to see that the pilot's eyes were blue, because that's how close they were. I mean,
A-10's an absolute pig, right?
It's a beast.
It is not pretty. It's meant to do one thing, right? Low and slow and deliver its payload.
Yep. And it can take a shit ton of damage too. You can see pictures of, particularly from a YF-1, of A-10s that it took just a tremendous amount of battle damage, and they still flew them home, and they just it's meant to be replaced, and they put it back in the air.
Yeah, Warthog's an appropriate name for that aircraft.
It is. It's an ugly aircraft that does its job amazingly well, and so. You get to see this thing fly in. And just the sound of that main gun, I mean, it sounds like brrr, and then there's just explosions, because what they're firing is depleted uranium bullets, and it's just exploding and shooting all over the place. And at a minimum, if you get hit with that, you're losing limbs. But it probably did way worse. And then from there, so they did a couple gun runs, and then we dropped a few bombs on them, and we heard them over the ICOM after we gotten out of this ambush. My interpreter, who's now recovered his senses after emptying his AK over my head, he says, "Sir, you need to hear what they're saying." And I said, "What's going on?" He's like, "They need more vehicles for the wounded," and they said that we are worse than the Russians.
No kidding.
Which is probably the highest compliment I've ever been given.
Yeah, well, we'll take that. And I mean, again, they fought them for over a decade, right? I think, maybe.
Right.
Right. And the Russians were ruthless.
I don't know how many like white-haired Afghan war vets were still running around in the Taliban ranks, but there was enough to remember them. And they're also, a country that prides itself on lore and story. So Lord knows that people have been brought up with like, hey, look, this is in your lineage to do this. So, that was one pretty particular area. And then, I certainly could tell another one, but
yeah, I mean, we very
pause and we need to chat about that.
So let me ask you a question in regards to something that you've kind of written. I want to call, so again, fantastic author. I highly recommend that anyone listening to this or watching this checks out your Substack, checks out your webpage, because I think you have 4 titles, if I'm not mistaken, that you've published, and
5 now.
Excuse me. And so one of the things you've written about was a little bit of the ambiguity of combat, right? And so the fact that, and I think this is really important for leaders, specifically young leaders, or actually really any leaders, and I think this plays into your, your current profession, right, is that decisions aren't always right versus wrong. Can you walk us through a moment in combat when the uncertainty was a little overwhelming and how you found the clarity to act? In my personal experience, what I've seen is a lot of people, or lessons, informal lessons, whether that be tactical decision games or whatnot, have forced people into this idea that sometimes combat or conflict or uncertainty is binary. There is a right answer and there's a wrong answer. But oftentimes what I've seen on the ground is it's quite different. Have you experienced things like that? And what have you done to kind of overwhelm or overcome that, and get clarity inside of the gray?
Yeah. Well, luckily I haven't been faced with too many of those. Those are the kinds of things that really weigh on a leader. And you're talking about things that there's no right answers per se, because we're not dealing necessarily, you're dealing with things that are happening in the moment, not a pre-decision, or something that, you're going into it going, this is going to compromise my ethics. Or morally, I feel that this is really not something that we should be doing, like ahead of going in there. You're now faced with this at the point of time, the point of impact. And not on this deployment in particular, but, as we're talking about this as a vignette, we were in combat and taking some pretty heavy fire from a compound. My guys were not pinned down, but definitely needed some help. We were not going to assault this compound. It wasn't worth attacking. We're actually going towards it to try and ascertain like whether this person was there, and somebody was there. But it was to a point of like, we made a decision before we went on the objective. Like, okay, if we're on and we get into combat, then we're on and we're going to just fight while we're there. But this is not meant to like assault to destroy, assault to kill, capture this guy. He's not so important that we have to, fight him out with scaling ladders and all this other stuff. And you want to have those conversations ahead, like what is the value of this mission? Like, what are we going to do? And I learned that from working primarily with Army aviation, Army soft aviation, because they were like, look, if we're going to fly there and we're going to do everything, we're going to risk machine, life, limb, eyesight, and most importantly, your guys, because we're the kind of you're the customer. There's no time in the cockpit to have a discussion as to whether or not we're going in. If the orders we're going in, then we're going in, and if we're not, then we're going to pull out. And that's it. So what is the decision points? And now is the time to have those chats. And so in this case, we'd gone in and said, okay, look, if we get the opportunity and it works out that we can go get this guy and he's in this compound and it works for us, great. But we are not going to get ourselves decisively engaged to a point where we've got stuff that is going to overwhelm our ability to do that, or outpace our ability to do that.
He's a high value target, but he's not like the pinnacle, right? Like, hey, we're going to do our best, but not overcommit.
Absolutely. And we're lightly armed, certainly very skilled, but lightly armed. Don't have a lot of, the only backup you have is your own, unless you get some more air support, et cetera. But you're kind of self-contained and self-reliant. But so my guys are now getting shot at, can't really flank. I mean, not really meant to flank, but they're trying to get out of this position. They got them in a pretty good fire sack, and they're undercover. But ground force, I was a ground force commander, but the assault leader was like, "Hey man, we need a bomb on this compound," and I have the wherewithal. It's my final decision as to whether or not we drop a bomb on that compound. And I was like, "Hey, can you get yourselves out of there?" Well, yeah. Well, now we're having this discussion, right? But we don't have any casualties yet. Well, and luckily we didn't at this point throughout the mission. But I was like, "Have we got any casualties? No, we're good. But the fire's pretty heavy." It's like, "All right, well, we'll see what we can do." But I started talking to my JTAC, like, "Hey, what can you get a bomb?" He goes, "Yeah, we get a bomb in about 5 minutes." And I said, "Well, we may need it faster than that." But again, you don't know what's in that compound. I mean, you'd love to assume that it's an enemy, it's a barracks, right? Full of nothing but enemy fighters. And they're all confirmed that they're just card-carrying bad guys. And, when you drop that bomb, it's all good. 2 500-pound bombs on a compound in Afghanistan will vaporize it. And you'll be picking through the rubble. So, and this was at night. So they're taking a pretty good gate of fire, but it's really more because of what these guys inside the compound can hear. Our guys can actually see them and stuff with their lasers and using lasers. And so it does a pretty, I can see the engagement through my nods. Like, oh, shit, it's pretty sticky because I'm up on this hill watching this thing. And so I just told him, like, "Look, I can't give you a bomb unless it's just so overwhelming you can't get out of there." And if we had casualties and you were, just totally pinned down, okay. But right now, I need you to just get yourselves extricate as best you can. So that was met with a little bit of frustration.
Sure. There's a natural.
And when he came back,
there's a natural, like, aggressive kind of like, let's bomb, let's blow it, right? And
oh yeah, and in my mind, I was like, well, never mind. So you don't know who everybody's inside of that compound, women, kids, whatever. And CivCAS is a huge concern, but we're ostensibly the good guys, and we're supposed to be circumspect in what we're doing. And at that point in time, I could have easily come up with enough of a reason to put 2 bombs on that thing, and been justified in doing it, or at least would likely have been justified, exonerated in doing so. But that was not something that I wanted to take on. And they were able to eventually, kind of get themselves out of it. We actually set up another support by fire position. We maneuvered some vehicles so that we could put some more fire on the compound itself to then allow these guys to get back, and then so everything was recovered. But then he wanted to have a one-to-one conversation with me. It got very rhetorical very quickly. What if? How? What would have happened? I can't believe you didn't drop it. Because I had a reputation to be fairly aggressive, and I think they expected that. I don't do this. Don't worry about it. So, yeah, I mean, that challenges you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've got some follow-up questions on that. So first of all, I think it's huge that you're able to allow the space. One of the things that I've studied and seen with leaders is that oftentimes they don't allow for. One of the things I think is really good about special operations communities is that we have a hot wash. And I struggled myself when coming back to big Marine Corps after being a Force Reconnaissance Marine for a number of years, was that in our culture, right, the 0321 or 0372 or, the 0307, right, is what it's turned into now, like the Recon and MARSOC community, when you go into a hot wash, you take your rank off, right? It's like, hey, who did this?
Oh, yeah.
And that's not something that I experienced outside of those communities. And I think that's very nuanced. It's very unique to them, because I would get back to the, regular infantry and we're like, okay, hot wash. And I'm like, oh, I can't wait for what happens here because this person did X. And they're like, well, sir, I think everything was great. And I was like, were you watching the same attack that I was watching? Because I don't, And so as a leader, having that space, opening that dialogue up, what was that like in that kind of conversation, if you're willing to share that?
Going back to what you were saying, early on, we established that that's how we did our hot washes. And some people took a little bit more offense to that than others, even in the staff NCO ranks, particularly if, we had guys who'd come from the regular Marine Corps to come into MARSOC when they stood it up, and, maybe culturally not quite used to that. And some first sergeant seeing a gunny poking me in the chest in the desert, yelling at me, calling me Ivan. Ivan, I can't believe you didn't, in the heat of the moment, he would have lost his mind. And I'm like, back to him. Hey, first name, don't forget what we're doing here. And oh, by the way, like, don't accuse me. So then we got ourselves calmed down and never got the emotion out. But when you get home, you're right. There's no friends on a hot wash. And my unit had spent quite a bit of time working with other special operations forces, in particular the Special Air Service. And their hot washes are absolutely just merciless.
I've been through one of those. I don't want to do it again.
Yeah, I mean, so we were working with them, and we thought like, oh man, we really nailed this because we're doing special reconnaissance for one of their groups, and like we thought like, oh man, we hit it. Oh man, at the end I was like, I need a beer. This is awful.
Quit. I'm not good at this job.
Yeah, no, it was really bad. And and I think they really are, in my opinion, with a few others, they're like the gold standard of how you should be doing this shit. And it was, so that was built into the culture for sure. But it's one thing you're in a hot washing training, it's another one it's in combat, and now you're just taught. Now it just is. You've got no, hey, let's redo this. Mm-hmm. Hey, next time, like now it's like, well, this is what you did. And yeah, it worked, but not if, but and what are we learning from this? And then, you can go all the way back. Well, is this guy really that important? Like if he's really that important that we kill him, then why do we send a ground assault force against it? Anyway, let's just blow up the compound. Right. Well, we can't do that because there could be civilians there. So what's the difference between what I just did?
I struggled as an enlisted guy and later on as an officer of being able to see different perspectives. I do really appreciate the perspective that the officer corps has. They purposefully train and educate the officers to try to remain above the fray at times, to see the whole picture, right? To understand. So, I mean, I've been the enlisted guy poking the chest of an officer. Why didn't you do this? We should have, because I'm like, I want blood, right? I'm like a dog with a bone, right? And I want to end this situation as fast as possible to protect my team. And then I've had the arguments with the officers before that are like, hey, there's a lot of other things going on. One of the things that I wrote specifically in my book was I wrote the line that Afghanistan was fought with rifles in our hands and rule books in our pockets. And it was such a very hard, it was a different war for me than it was in Iraq, because at points in Iraq, like Fallujah and stuff, it's like, hey, bad guys that way. So, and like you said, you're operating in the green zone, having to be able to have the wherewithal to say like, I can't use speed and violence of action everywhere I go. And I can't just blow everything up, because what are we doing? Right.
Yeah. Well, I think at that point in Afghanistan, you could almost call it, we're still in phase one, which is just, like you said, very much violence of action, very much. I mean, we're on level 2 con ops. We could just go out and do whatever we wanted. I mean, it was blanket. We could just get into fights all over the place. And then you get into the second phase, which is really kind of the VSO period, where we're trying to do a lot more nation building. We're really trying to be more, focused, or at least that was the intent. I've argued before that there probably wasn't much of a plan. They thought there was, but it really wasn't. But the second phase was, trying to do that. And then the third is obviously where it just comes to a point of just almost like throwing your hands in the air and go like, at what point are you going to take interest in your own fate?
I've got
and that's not to diminish. Yeah, well, that's not to diminish, anyone at any one place that they served and how. But I kind of got to see Afghanistan in its phases as it went. Never mind that I was working in SOCOM and Joint Special Operations Command and other worldwide venues or missions in different venues that, ostensibly are all supposed to be nested. And I can tell you that it in a lot of ways it wasn't.
That's frustrating, I'm sure, especially to so much to it and just to kind of watch that. So how many deployments did you do to Afghanistan specifically?
5.
Oh, jeez, Louise. Oh, God.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. That's a lot. Okay. So you spent, were these, if you can say, were these longer deployments like a typical Marine 7-month deployment, or were they shorter stints?
Some of them were shorter. It kind of depended on who I was working for and what the mission was. What I did, my 2 longest ones were with MARSOC. Once as the Dasher Platoon Commander, once as I was Fox Company's commander in 2012, 2013. Wow. So, and that was 9 months long. Wow. So I did, the majority of my deployments in Afghanistan, at least the longest, time in Afghanistan as a MARSOC guy.
So
I was in MARSOC the whole time, but working for MARSOC.
Yeah.
direct.
Okay. So that's cool. You got to stay. So when you crossed over to the dark side, right? When you crossed over, you got a chance to stay. Or is that accurate that you stayed for the remainder of your career?
Yeah,
that's fantastic.
I went from signing that letter with my monitor, him telling me, like, you're pretty much finished. And then people told me, like, hey, if you stick around MARSOC for too long, because I was still in 03/02/03/07, this will not be good for your career. And I managed to make a career out of something that wasn't supposed to be good for me. So anybody who's, looking at what should I do? How should I take my career, man? If you get an opportunity that is, valuable to you, take it. Go. There's no guarantee. And honestly, like, the Marine Corps is a giant corporation. It needs people. It will find the people it needs to put where it needs to go. And if you're not fitting in exactly where you're supposed to, according to some sort of, org chart or progression, don't worry about it. Go do the thing that you believe you want to do.
I really appreciate that perspective. I think a lot of times,
I think the rest of it will take care of itself.
Yeah. A lot of times we almost live to this idea of a script and what you should do, what the next right action is. And I really resonate with that.
Right.
Follow your dreams.
And remember, I was only going to do this 4 or 5 years and go be a federal cop. And so then but then when I got into it, I found I really liked it. I was like, well, how can I just keep doing this? Like, I really like being in the recon community. I really like being a part of this. I like the energy. I like the people. I like I like the gear and the gadgets, and I like the training. And okay, so how can I keep doing this? And that's what I set out to do. But it also came at a cost, and it also I had to take very calculated, considered risks, and I weighed those, and that's it.
That's fantastic.
Just a quick word from our sponsor, Delete Me, and we'll get right back to this episode. Delete Me makes it easy, quick, and safe to remove your personal data online at a time when surveillance and data breaches are common enough to make everyone vulnerable. Data brokers make a profit off your data. Your data is a commodity. Anyone on the web can buy your private details. This can lead to identity theft, phishing attempts, and harassment. But now you can protect your privacy with Delete Me. As someone with an active online presence, privacy is really important to me, especially with my background at the agency and in the military. I've been doxxed before by some unsavory characters, and it puts me and my family at risk. Additionally, as technology advances, it's even easier for people to find me. So I love getting my reports from Delete Me on what they found and helped remove from my online footprint to help protect me and my family. Take control of your data and keep your private life private by signing up for Delete Me. Now at a special discount for our listeners. Today, get 20% off your Delete Me plan by texting COMBAT to 64000. The only way to get 20% off is to text COMBAT to 64000. That's COMBAT to 64000. Message and data rates apply. And now, back to this episode.
So I really like to transition here to a point about, so reading through your Substack, one of the things that really, really popped out to me was the short story. I don't know how to describe it. It's called What If? And I think that this is something that people who exist in the combat arms specialties we share something very similar, that this is not something that necessarily resonates with people who don't live this kind of lifestyle. So I read it and it like was visceral. I like brought tears. I've written my own, version of something like this. Can you describe a little bit? I'm sorry, this is a little off of what I'm sure you were ready to talk about, but
I called it, and it was developed with a group of people that I knew who they work in some very covered activities. And they asked me one time if I had a what if packet. And I said, what's that? They said, well, in blunt terms, it's what to do if something happens to you. And it is not just your will. It's like, what do you want us to do with all of your stuff? Is there stuff you don't want people to find? Do you have items that you want to see certain people get? Not only that, but have you considered if somebody were to like open this packet that you've written letters or put something together so that they know how you felt? And they said, look, this is not something easy to do, because you'll fill out a will and you'll fill out all these other things. But have you thought about who your pallbearers are going to be? Have you thought about the music at your funeral? Have you thought about the things that your wife will have to take care of? How about your finances? Like, there was this huge, it's not like it was a checklist, but there's this litany of stuff that they asked about. And they said, the reason I tell you this is because you're not going to get to choose. And the people who are left behind are going to have to clean all this shit up. And you probably need to name someone here with whom you're working to kind of be an executor of sorts, not so much of your will and stuff, but what your family's going to have questions and all kinds of stuff, and you need to like have somebody. And so I named him, and I told him exactly what was in that package, and it remained in my sort of my holding. You don't deploy with it; it remains at home base, and I kept it with me for a long time. And in fact, every once in a while, I'd go in and update the letters to different people just because of things that changed or they've gotten older, particularly my children. Not getting rid of the other letters, I just kind of, then you had more letters for them to read as you were going along. So it's kind of like this time capsule of preparing for really bad stuff in a way to sort of blunt that possibility.
Right. I think what I see is that we have an experience. I don't know if it's a luxury, but we have the experience of understanding whether or not we want to or not, the finality of death. And so we're always around it, right? Whether or not it's enemies or friendlies, civilians, there's just death, right? And so there's this tough, another piece that resonated with some of your writing was the conversation or the writing around losing your father and losing someone suddenly. And conversations that just couldn't, closure that just couldn't happen. I like the idea of what you've done with the what if packet, because I think that even if you're a civilian, I think that there's value in trying to speak from beyond the grave, almost putting down letters and words. It also says here that you burned your what if packet. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. I think that first, I got to tell you, I'm thank you for reading that. And thank you. I mean, I've got like 65 articles written now, and, that someone went back and took a look at that catalog, I really appreciate. So thank you. I think the burning of it was kind of closing out. I've had a difficulty, even now, 3 years after retiring. My transition is still just kind of ongoing. This is something I did for all of my adult life. We lived in a very closed society, a private one, a lonely one, particularly for being a leader inside of this stuff, despite perhaps some limited popularity with my own people. I'm certainly unpopular with others, so you're not going to please everybody. It's the truth. But I think for me in the what if packet and getting rid of it, it was time for me to just, accept that this portion of my life needs to gently be put in the past. And that part of that has to deal with me reconciling certain things. But the other was that the what if packet was a snapshot of who I was at the point in time and all of those pieces. And I think to your point of finality of death and the thought that you can be killed at any moment, whether it's a helicopter or parachute crash or accident or you get shot, blown up, what have you. That was done out of a necessity. And then I no longer had to keep that. Now I could still write down, hey, I'm actually really doing these hymns sung and that kind of thing, but it doesn't have to be as sort of like, Ivan wanted you to have this. And then this, that's the only thing of me they're holding anymore. And I guess I think I wanted to say to myself, you've earned a lease on the next portion of your life. And not maybe that's an anchor, but it is something that in order to actually be able to appreciate that, you can't be hanging on to the way that you were living.
It resonates a ton. I actually, when I read it, when I read the burn portion, I was like, you know what, to me, that says is we're a very Recon, MARSOC, right? The Marine Corps, we're very ritualistic in a lot of the things that we do, almost cult-like, actually not almost, cult-like in a lot of ways, in a lot of things that we do. And I saw,
as Kim Philby said, if you want to defect, you have to belong.
That's exactly correct.
No, I'm not Kim Philby. I'm walking out of here to go to the Russian. Just saying. It's like
that felt like that was a closing of a chapter, right? And you're saying,
mm-hmm.
I recently, when kind of going through, like the storage unit that is your life when you move around and deploy a whole bunch, is I found my letters as a 21-year-old Lance Corporal going into Fallujah, right? Like this is like the same kind of thing. And it's a snapshot to who you were at that point in time. And I think that's really valuable. And so for any of the listeners out there, or viewers, I think that that's something, it's an exercise that I would recommend. I don't know that you would, but it's an exercise that I would recommend it's a consolidation of your life at that point in time and what you want to give to the next generation of people that would follow you inside of that. I really do appreciate you sharing that story specifically. It's pretty vulnerable to do that.
Well, I think that, just in light of being now a day after 9/11, 3,000 people went to work that day and didn't come home. And I've suffered combat losses through my own people, and having to inventory somebody's equipment and their life and all their stuff, and they're not there, it just really weighs on you, and you still have a mission to complete, that kind of thing. So yeah, I think it is worth just at least exploring where you are.
Yeah, you also write about compartmentalization as a leader, which I think if I could implore people to read your writing and just devour it, I think that you, in my opinion, like I said, total fanboy, never met you, right? But if you want to figure out, if you're out there and you want to figure out what right looks like, what a full spectrum, and I believe warrior looks like, I think that you have this in your writings, right? This feels very meditations, right? Marcus Aurelius's kind of meditations. It really does. And I know you said it took you 10 years to write the book and 53 years to create it. I think that's fantastic. So I do have some
that one.
Yes, yes, absolutely. I have some questions. So you mentioned family. So you have 3 children. Is it 2 sons and 1 daughter, if I'm not mistaken?
2 daughters and a son.
2 daughters and a son. Excuse me.
Yep.
You deployed a lot. How did your family? How did that work? What was that conversation like? What was that lifestyle, that tempo? Because you were effectively being what your dad was to you. You were gone a lot. You were a big professional soldier, right? Did that take a toll on your family? Did it have any kind of, are there regrets, things that you wish that you could have done differently as a husband, as a father, as a man?
I think it's something they grew up with. I'm going to definitely put words in people's mouths and talk about thoughts that they may have had. But I'll also say that we're very close in being able to talk about that together. And that doesn't mean that, I came home and just broke down about all the shit that happened to me in front of all of my family. But as they came of age, having those discussions, my youngest daughter, attended West Point. She had a lot of questions about just being a leader, and anytime we could have a discussion, I could give something anecdotally or, real world example of just something that would help her with that journey. My son's a Marine Corps officer, so he certainly had questions as well, things that he wanted to do, and ways of approaching things. But, people have to learn how to exist in the world with someone like us, me. And it just became something, this is what their father did. And they understood it, and they understood that, but, there are definitely some tensions there. But I will say that I believe, the best I could in balancing things out, in that when I was home, I tried to be home and present and available. There were also some times where I was just like, this is strange and weird, and I don't get it.
There's handbooks on how to be a Marine officer. There are not handbooks on how to be a Marine officer coming home after combat deployments, and how to be
and not being a special operations officer and being saddled with all kinds of stuff. Never mind, your own personal feelings. But like, I came home from deployment and almost immediately got on a plane to go to a wedding, and I remember sitting in the airport drinking a beer as just the world going by me. And I was like, I don't know what's going on here.
I wrote about that a lot. That was something that I struggled with, was like, for us, it was deploy, super kinetic, and then like done, off. You're home, traffic, dogs barking, kids, whatever it is. Right. And you're kind of like, I mean, a week ago I was, doing whatever, right? That was a lot, I think, and a lot for us to continually cycle back through that.
Yeah, I think that's one of the issues that people don't necessarily grasp, and I do write about this in several different platforms. That we were, you talk about the greatest generation and others, and I'm not diminishing people's service across anything, but any war or what they did. But the United States, as I've come to find, its currency is warfare, whether it's supporting it or it's exporting it. It's what it does.
I hadn't told
and
that.
There's a lot of things I'm wrestling with as a result of that. Because as I said, I'm proud of my service. I'm proud of my children's service. I'm proud of the things that we have done. I'm proud of the people I served alongside. I do believe that what we were doing in its nascent stages was indeed righteous in some capacity. And I think we've also lost track of what the reasons we go do this stuff anymore. It's become so ingrained that it just isn't is. Won't get too deep into that, but ultimately, too much deeper than that. But ultimately, there's a disconnect, because we deployed so much and did this so often that it was just sort of like, well, Ivan's deployed again. Their dad's deployed again. Oh, anywhere you lived where it was Lejeune, Pendleton, what have you. Oh, they're deployed. They're not just deployed, they're at war. People get killed. People are dying. People lose their legs. People are getting paralyzed. People have all kinds of other issues. They're coming back not whole.
Yeah.
And so we did this perennially, AJ. We, us, you and I, collectively. And people just assumed it was just the way things go.
Going out for
and there's one thing where you can say, yeah, well, hey, you signed up for this. Well, sure, I guess I did. And as you said, I'm a military professional. But don't begrudge me my benefits or any of the other stuff that was sort of promised to me. Never mind that what you got to do on the backs of what we were doing. Thank you for your service, or thank you for serving so I didn't have to. Was that what are you saying? And that probably makes me sound like a real dick.
No,
so
I was at the gym yesterday, and I was talking to, guys in the locker rooms have like random tough guy conversations, I guess. I don't know. And, he asked me about a tattoo that I had, right? And I won't go into super big detail, but I have a tattoo that's this constellation of stars that was above my head when something significant happened. Sure. And I explained it, and I was kind of cagey with it because it's not his business, but I was being nice, right? And I said, yeah, it's the thing. And he says, well, thank you for your service. And the thing that came to mind was, I said, my only regret is that I have but one life to give to my country. And the look on his face was like, what? Like he had, I don't remember who said that. I know it was like a colonial kind of thing, right? But like Aaron Burr or something, right? Like so, but that's just not something that was in his wheelhouse. And to you and I, if I said that in our space, I struggle and I have my own consternation about our journey, where we've ended up. And what that is, I often have to question myself and say, were we the good guys? Good guys to us was a matter of perspective in my own way. But to that, like, I could say that statement to you and you go, yeah, no, I get it. Right. It's a service. It's like this thing. Any moments like
that? And I'm not rude. I don't say that to people. I just thank you. Okay. No worries. And it's not everything's meant to be a knife fight.
That's a good way to look at it.
And I think people are sincere. I do. I mean, I think but they also just, as I said, there's this, the other thing, and I've said this as well. We as, GWAT, modern war combat veterans, we don't look old by comparison. Like you look at a World War II vet, you look at a Korean War or Vietnam veteran, that's what a veteran, quote unquote, looks like. But as I was growing up, the Vietnam era veterans that would come to my house as my father's colleagues and people that I grew up knowing, they were just people too, right? So there's this idea, I think, that you kind of have, you fit this sort of mold as to, when you were serving and then afterward, by all means right now, I should be in a ball cap with my beard grown out appropriately, sleeve tattoos, and be a soft bro talks like this, man. Nobody talks like that. I mean, so
I love that.
For me, I guess I like being more of a counterculturalist to my own culture, like being a writer, like being a thinker, like talk about things. And it wasn't that I wasn't this when I was on active duty, but you talk about the compartmentalization. My family had to compartmentalize too. We all had to find ways to cope with that absence and the very real possibility that something bad could happen. It kind of nests your question about what if, and how my family worked with stuff. But I remember very specifically one time I was just not doing well in a very crowded area, and my son was like, "Do you want to get out of here?" There was no there was no other question. It was just like,
no major fanfare. Okay, didn't make a big production out of it. Nope. Just recognized. Yeah.
Now was a place that we spent some time and effort to try and get to, and some money, and it's like, we can be surfing in 7 hours. I said, done. We're out of here.
I like that. So as we start to kind of wind this thing down, I've got a few more, questions for you, more in line with transition, and then where you are now. Okay, I did 21 years. I retired 2 years ago. You did 24 years. You retired 3 years ago. After 24 years in uniform, what is the hardest part about figuring out who Ivan was without being, Lieutenant Colonel Ingram, without the Marine Corps? How have you gone through that process?
Well, I had the advantage in that when I was leaving service, I had a very good transition program called the Honor Foundation, which specifically works with primarily special operations people as they transition from service. And they try and match you with not only your interests, but your appropriate skill sets and things that will help you not only get a job, but work your way out of service in such a way that it's more comfortable. It's not going to be amazing, but you'll have a better way of getting out than just kind of the tap tamps TRS and then see you later. So it's a pretty involved program. But what I found with it was that there was a lot of expectations for me as an officer to be a certain thing, whether that was corporate or some sort of project manager or working in a hierarchical environment or becoming a consultant with another larger consultant company. But they were sort of like, these are jobs that are commensurate to your station, where you have come from. The money will be excellent, and you will have no problem transitioning into these. Just got to get you in the right place. And I think we can find you a job that you'll really enjoy. Early on, AJ, none of that felt right. And I have learned not to ignore that because I've also found that if you get into a place that it doesn't work, it's not going to get any better. I believe that the best part of THF was that I found out what I didn't want to do. And that was a hard thing for me to acknowledge and say, okay, something's wrong here. I don't want this. And it's actually was the impetus for my book, Dream Job. Because people told me, like, oh man, you're going to get out of your dream job, dude. And so I found that retiring allowed me to actually get at least, a reset on my life in such a way that I could design it and do anything I want. And I said, I really want to be a writer. And if somebody wants me to consult and work with them, I want to do that because they feel like they want to solve something and get through a problem, not just me be a consultant and show up and do a bunch of PowerPoints and talk garbage about what have you, or give you leadership platitudes. It's all been written. It's all been done.
Thank you.
Go find Tony Robbins' book or whatever the fuck else you want to read and do that. That's fine. But that's not how I do this. And so I said, okay, what do I want? What does it look like to Ivan? And that's where it became very uncomfortable. And so that's been the hardest part of transition, is actually giving myself the grace of saying, you get to do whatever you want. Again, you got to do some analysis. There are some calculations and risk that's associated with it. But ultimately, you know what you want to do and where you want to go. And I've always been able to find a way, and I will. And so I am a writer. I've become a writer. That's what I do. I do some consulting stuff. I also do some work, particularly with a group of people, former mostly special operations guys overseas. This is all boardroom mercenary stuff. It's not running around Poland or Ukraine or something like that. But yeah, I just said, okay, like that's been the embrace. And so you shed a little bit of that Lieutenant Colonel C, if you will, but it's also being comfortable in that space. And that is, they'd say, be comfortable with being uncomfortable. Well, what does that mean? Who's uncomfortable? You and I can both like being cold weather.
Sure.
But you might like cold weather, or you might, my tolerance might be, better or worse. Nobody likes having hair down the back of their shirt. I think that's sort of universal. But ultimately, some are like, well, the money's so good, I just put up with it. I've had people say that, like, I hate this job, but the money's so good, I just keep doing it. And I'm like, none of that is ever worth it to me.
I 100% agree. That challenge, I think, because I have to say, like, people are like, what do you do now? I'm like, I'm a writer, right? And it feels like it's just like kind of artsy and nebulous, right? When it's like,
oh, totally.
I feel like, oh, cool,
Have I read any of your stuff? Well, if you're asking me, probably not.
Yes.
Are you any good?
I think I'm terrible.
I'm really no, we're getting better. Yeah, I think I'm fucking great.
Yeah, and you should too, right?
All right. Well, yeah. I mean, if you haven't read my stuff, then you have no argument. That's big of you to say. Well, how would you know?
I love that.
But it's true. Yeah. I mean, there is a bit of a leap of faith towards going towards that. Having the confidence to say, yeah, I'm a writer. Or what do you write? And then you get into some discussion stuff. But I mean, I like all kinds of different writing, and I think that it's a great space. That is another thing that's helped me to really unpack a lot of this. The books that I write and the articles that I have, and my Substack is actually a lot like playing the guitar, which is something I do like to do. Nobody really likes to practice, but you get better when you practice. And that's kind of what writing with Substack is. It's my weekly scales, if you will. And sometimes it's great, and other times I'm just trudging around. I've had people say, this week is kind of boring. I'm like, well, I don't know. Everybody wants sensationalism or whatever, but you can't meet everybody's requirement. So
Right. I completely agree. I love the idea that you've been able to anchor truth and story kind of together. Can you explain some of the process behind some of the, I would say, almost like parables or allegories, right, that you're able to write? Can you explain some of that process?
I think I'm looking for, I'll just shamelessly in my book, right? So Once We Pledge Forever, it's out by the Sager Group. You can get it on Amazon. I think it's a pretty big book, so take a look. But one of the things, I tried to write a book that has actually more Yes, it is. It is a military action book in some ways. There's plenty of bang bang shoot 'em up in there, so everybody can scratch their itch on that. But it is not a piece of airport fiction. I wrote it so that it appeals to sort of universal themes that people can identify with, whether or not they were in the military, and that's sense of isolation and a sense of having to do things that you question. I think everybody does that in their daily lives, with their jobs or in relationships. And ultimately, the book is a love story. It is about relationships, and it's about reconciliation. It has a thriller aspect to it. I think it scratches a lot of itches, and the story is meant to be something that someone can read and actually think about psychologically, not just kind of consume. At least that's the way I approached it.
That absolutely resonates. I think that listen, I've read my share of all the books you're supposed to read when you're a military, enlisted, senior enlisted officer. I am not interested anymore in reading, like you said, like the 3 C's of leadership or whatever, like that. Those books have been written. And I think that anytime, like, this was the struggle that I faced when I was reading and looking for leadership advice. I found that there was a difference between a practitioner and an academic. And a lot of academics were writing books about leadership that would fall very, very flat when a practitioner, specifically a practitioner in combat arms. I think that books about leadership in combat arms can transcend into business. I do not believe that business leadership books have much, in my own personal opinion, much of a space to transcend into combat leadership, mostly because I believe that business leadership books are written under the generalization of the creation of capital, where in leadership books or things like our scenarios of where we've led and where we fought is the currency is sacrifice, right? So we're not here to make a better bottom line. We're here to be able to do a job where we are just trying to make through some pretty tough situations. And that really resonates in your writing with me and things that I've been able to take away as well as a hopeful future leader.
No, I appreciate that. I will say that hasn't stopped the Marine Corps from adopting, Stephen Covey's 7 Habits, the Lean Sigma 6, all the other corporate stuff. And I think there is a danger, especially when and that's what sets people up, very well to go into corporate type of transitions from the military. The hardest part they have is that the people in corporate are not military for the most part, and you can't talk to them certain ways, and they don't understand that, And so, that's one part. But the other part is you have to be very careful, particularly when you're dealing with human endeavors, that you don't look at your people as capital or some sort of commodity that's easily traded or gotten done away with. And the leadership thing is very simple, AJ. And this is just observation, right? People want to know that their leaders give a shit about them, and they don't want to have their time wasted, and they also want to be treated with dignity and respect. So treat your people with dignity and respect, and don't waste their fucking time, and you'll get what you need.
I completely agree.
There.
That leads us into my 3 closing questions. You just answered one of them, which is fantastic.
All right.
So these are my lightning rounds that we're kind of playing around with, right? But they're lightning round questions that are 30-second answers or less. I need bite-sized chunks of trying to, summarize 24 years of fantastic service.
All right.
So, okay, first question is, if you could meet anyone in history, who would it be, and what would you say to them? If you had 30 seconds to talk to them, not what questions would you ask, what would you say to this person if you had 30 seconds or less?
Oh, gosh. I think if you got an opportunity to talk to Abraham Lincoln and just say, how did you do it?
I love that.
And that's, you want to talk about being assailed from all sides.
The idea that I look at with the similarities between, I'm sure, what he had to deal with and where we are at now is we could definitely use his leadership.
They may have, as you're saying that may have subconsciously just because, gave me 30 seconds, and it's not like I probably wander around thinking all the time of people I wouldn't mind meeting.
You're going to think of it after this. Like, I should have said this.
Oh, possibly. I'll call you and be like, we got to reshoot this. No, but possibly, yeah. I think maybe transcendentally it might have come in that I was like, you know what?
I appreciate that. So you kind of covered it a little bit. If you have 30 seconds to distill for the next generation of leaders, what do you say?
Slow down and seek to understand.
I appreciate that.
We're moving way too fast. I call it getting out ahead of your skis, or moving faster than your headlights, or all the anecdotes, cliches apply.
And then my final question, you've kind of covered a little bit. We've had some chats on and off air about the state of what veterans and what the space looks like. Can you describe for me what your vision of, as a father, right, as a special operations Marine for 24 years, as a husband, as a man, what does masculinity look like to you?
Grace. You have to have some grace for opinions that you don't like. You have to be able to understand that you may not agree with everything out there, but you are in control of who you are and how you react. And you have to give yourself some grace for that. But it's too easy. All the other stuff's out there, being tough, being a man, etc. But could you walk away from something and, knowing you were right, even if you were, the way you were going to act was righteous, and be comfortable with that? I think it's a harder thing to do. If you really talk about the warrior's journey, it's one that's one of learning. And I think maybe that's what I'm trying to do now is learn how to give myself and others, grace, slow down, think about what's out there.
Wow. I really appreciate that. I really appreciate.
God knows you wouldn't want to have known me as a lieutenant.
Well, Ivan, I cannot thank you enough. So once again, for anyone that's listening or watching, once we pledged forever, Ivan Ingraham, retired lieutenant colonel from MARSOC, storied career. We will put the book as well as his link for his Substack in the description. Please, I implore you to take a look at this. I think that his writing, who this man is life-changing, and nothing short of that has been for me. And with that, I'll give you the parting shot, Mr. Ingraham, if you'd like to say anything to the audience before we go.
Yeah, I really appreciate the time today, AJ. Definitely. I never thought I'd say this before, but you can Google me. I got a website and everything else, and all those pluggables. But it's been my pleasure to come on and chat with you.